Hello, fellow readers. 'Tis I, the Rumpledone. The Mindful Athlete, Secrets to Pure Performance by George Mumford. The foreword by Phil Jackson. Mindfulness, mindful. It's almost becoming a buzzword. It's almost like kind of cool right now. Everybody's talking about, not maybe everybody, but a lot of people are talking about mindfulness. I think it's coming out of the minimalist, the less is more crowd. You know, people wanting to just be mindful of everything. And it's a good idea to be mindful. Let me read a few passages here. I only got 4. I learned early to keep my mouth shut. It has taken me decades to unlearn it. When my dad wasn't railing on me for no good reason, the cops or others were doing so. I recall getting pulled over by the police while riding in the back seat of a friend's car. When I asked, "What's the violation, officer?" the police officer responded, "Who the F are you, Perry Mason?" I had to be silenced or else I would have been beaten into submission. Being African American, I had 2 choices: speak up and get beat up and often go to jail, or be quiet, be very quiet. I chose the latter option, which became woven into my emotional blueprint. I did not speak up to my father, the cops, or even the coaches. I learned to shut up and be, and I carried that oppression around like an albatross. Whatever emotional pain I experienced, I unconsciously buried in my body. No wonder pain became my constant companion. I mean, wow. And you wonder about Black Lives Matter. Not trying to turn this into a political discussion, but it's just deep when you see how some people, they choose things based on their survival instincts. And sometimes they choose things that might be harmful in the long term, but they're thinking of the short term. And this isn't a good thing. There's just so many people that have been beaten into submission. And so many people who have, stood up and they've been beaten. So I guess the question is, if you're going to take a beating, do you want to take a beating just because, or do you want to take a beating because you stood up? Let's move on to page 58. I also came to realize that you couldn't solve problems with the same consciousness that created them. It's only in changing your consciousness that you can solve problems and transform your game, whatever it is and wherever you're playing it. I think that goes right into Einstein. If you keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. But it's a little bit deeper, because this says consciousness. In other words, your awareness, your being, not just what you're doing, but what you're thinking, what you're believing. You've got to change your consciousness. Maybe you need to change it from being unconscious to being conscious. So many people do things automatically. They do things without thought. Well, I was just thinking something happened this morning. Oh, maybe I'll do a different video of that. Let me just stick to the book review here. Okay, let's move on to page 178. A state of wonder. High performers often look at mistakes and failures through the prism of error correction and attaining more skills, more knowledge, and more experience. No matter how many times they fall, they maintain a mental state of wonder. They keep asking, how about if I just go and do this and let it speak to me instead of assuming I know in advance what it is? When we can operate on the principle that we don't know anything but we have everything to learn, we're infused with a sense of wonder. It's like a little kid who's learning to walk. he or she keeps falling down, but then something incredible starts to happen, and eventually the child is able to move slowly forward on wobbly feet. Then that incredible thing that seems so difficult becomes second nature. Think about that. Ponder that. Looking at failure and mistakes through the prism of error correction and attaining more skill. I like that one. I like that one a lot. Okay, finally the last little snippet I'll share, page 209. If something unexpected happens that throws us for a loop, we can freak out and say, this should not be happening. Or we can train ourselves to respond and go with the flow. You can't keep what's happening from happening, but you can choose how to respond. You can react and get the sympathetic nervous system riled up and flood your body with stress hormones that impede your game. Or you can sit back, breathe, observe what's happening, and respond to what is, rather than what you think should be, could have been, or was supposed to be. Okay, so this is happening instead of that. Wow, well, I need to change course and find a new path out of this situation. You know, it's something that I realize about myself there. I mean, I have an idea how things should be, supposed to be, how things should work. And I also have a very strong sense of fairness and fair play and equality and equitableness. And when something doesn't match up to that, I usually want to fight back. I usually want to stand up, say, hey, that's not fair, that's not equitable, you know, that you're being selective. In fact, I guess I should talk about what happened this morning, because I made a phone call and they returned my call and I said, hey, you guys are stopping this, and you're going to start something else later, and in between there's like this void. Well, I mean, you shouldn't stop something until you start the new thing, because, you know, there's certain people who have qualified for the old thing, and they're not going to be recognized just because you put these arbitrary lines in the sand. And we went back and forth. And so finally I said, are you the one that made the final decision? And they said no. So, well, who did? Oh, well, this board. Well, how do I get in contact with the board? Well, no. How do I get in contact with the board? And of course I got the runaround and, oh, I'll get back to you on that. But you see, that's just me standing up again. But sometimes there's certain things that you just can't, you do not have the power to change what's going on in some situations. But like they said, you can change how you react to it. I mean, you can say, hey, this isn't supposed to be happening, but if it's happening and you can't stop it, then you've got to react to it and react the best way so your outcome's the best one possible. So this book, just like the other one I reviewed recently, it's a good book. I'd highly recommend it, and hopefully you can learn something that you can apply to your life. The Mindful Athlete by George Mumford.